maybe it would make more sense to just go the traditional way because it costs money.
Hello everybody, welcome to Value Tokenized. Today we're excited to interview Roxana Nasoi, co-founder of CryptoLaw podcast, a respected female voice from blockchain community, a marketing professional and advisor to multiple blockchain-related projects.
Roxana has over 10 years experience in the field and an extensive network in more than 45 countries around the world. And today we'll be discussing security tokens perspective from different regions.
Hi, Roxana. Thank you for being with us at Value Tokenized. We're really excited to have you as you're actually the first lady that we're interviewing. Can you please tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you join the blockchain space?
So I started in the online space. I started 10 years ago in college. So I started freelancing and I built my basically my client base from there. And I launched a few companies like digital agencies. I had about 100 clients that I worked with. In 2017, the beginning of 2017, I decided to actually look at blockchain beyond just crypto, like actually looking to help companies in the space. So I started helping out with a bit of community management, marketing, and then it went to getting involved in actually doing an ICO and advising other ICOs. So it just, it adds up. I have this tendency of connecting points and building like a web, a spider web around me and what I can do and what I can offer. So that's what basically happened even in this space.
So your work is really international. And do you work with Asia a lot?
Yeah. I mean, more than just work, I actually almost moved there. I was doing so much. I was doing Asia, Europe, like you do, let's say, London, Paris, commuting so much. I built my connections in Asia. I met a lot of great people in Hong Kong, in Vietnam, Bangkok, in Thailand. In Bangkok, I have a nice community that I built there with about 200 people. In Japan.
Speaking about Hong Kong, can you share your overall thoughts on the regulation in this area? For example, like in November, Hong Kong's financial watchdog unveiled a new set of regulations of cryptocurrencies that enhance investor protection. And some people think that it's a good thing, and others think that it will stop this area from developing in this new field. What do you think about this?
So with Hong Kong, there's no stopping in development. From the financial point of view, the jurisdiction is so the dynamic in the jurisdiction is so accelerated. Their biggest problem now that they're facing is the housing market and real estate, just because they have specific rules, so they can't build buildings let's say neighborhoods in specific areas, although they have the areas. Everybody thinks that Hong Kong is a tiny island and everything is just built and there's no land. There's a lot of land, but the problem is they have specific rules and they don't allow building on this type of land, real estate. So one of the biggest issues that they have the housing market, which is oversaturated. But the financial markets in Hong Kong, they're always, Asia in general and Hong Kong is always ahead of the trends. It's always ahead of the trends. So in 2017, we saw this huge wave of ICO bans around Asia. So there's Hong Kong banned ICOs, South Korea banned ICOs just because of their gambling nature. There's a lot of speculation with the secondary markets of tokens, right? But the technology presented a lot of opportunities. So now you have, for example, South Korea, you have Jeju Island, which is going to become a blockchain island. Hong Kong itself wants to become a blockchain island. And in terms of regulations, this November, what they said was something in the lines of, so the SFC said that if this is what they want to do. They want to turn Hong Kong as a trading hub, a global trading hub. But in order to have a trading hub that is globally recognized, you need regulations that actually serve the companies and the parties involved in the trading business. So what they said, they require platforms to register through the SFC. They require investors, if they hold a minimum $1.2 million investment and a minimum 10% in crypto, then they have to register through the SFC. But it's good because you need, this is not something I like saying, but you need regulations and you need the law to be on your side. When you don't have clear, when the game is not clear, you don't know if what you're doing today can't affect you 5 years from now. So having regulations in place, it really helps you understand the extent to which you can develop your business from a business perspective, the type of markets that you can tap into. So it's not bad. When I hear people say, oh, no, but it's bad that we have regulations. It's not, because when you don't have them, it's chaotic. It's pure chaos. And we've seen the type of damage that it can do. It can destroy people's lives because you have inexperienced people tapping into trading and cryptocurrencies, and that generates a lot of chaos. And I think the first step that Hong Kong did was go to accredited investors and map out with them the processes. And we'll probably in a few years we'll see smaller investors being invited to join the game again.
Do you see Hong Kong becoming the epicenter for asset tokenization, as some people claim?
I don't agree with the idea of monopoly, So I think it's important to actually decentralize, to have various regions, jurisdictions being, the epicenters of their area. So I think we would have more balance if we had Hong Kong, South Korea, Malta, Switzerland, US, Singapore. It creates more balance and more opportunities for people. Because when you channel everything into one source, on most occasions, like 99% of times, people will they will take advantage of that and they will become greedy. But if you give people more options, then the choice is theirs where they go. You don't force them. You don't force their choice. They decide for themselves. So I'm seeing this. I do think we'll have major players in Asia, more than we see in the US or Europe, just because Asia is ahead of the technology curve. So the adoption, I always say this, but the technology adoption is higher in Asia. People are investing more, people are believing more, and they're huge tech consumers. So compared to Europe, which is more conservative, US, which is again, US is usually the second one to pick on the trends, and they're great at mass producing it and offering to the world. But the ones that initiate, like the pioneers, usually are the Asian markets.
And if you had to choose a jurisdiction for a token generation event, which one would you choose?
At this point, I think the US is the US has great potential because they have laws that have been there for 84, 85 years. I know there's been in the media, there's been some highlights that they want to change, the SEC wants to change some of their laws and some of their perspective towards securities, basically. But I think you know what you're up against if you go to the US. So, and it's interesting, but one of my contacts on LinkedIn shared with me a story where they were basically investigated, though they did nothing bad. They really followed the books, but one of their advisors or one of the people involved with their business was under investigation or under the suspicion of doing illegal activities in the USA. So what they did is they invited the company to actually explain their relation with that person, their involvement. So they had to go through a series of procedures. They had to drop the STO and go for traditional equity raising. But it was a learning experience for them, just how serious they are in the US in terms of who is involved in your business. That's why with STOs, and a lot of people say this, but you can't be an STO advisor unless you're accredited and licensed to do so.
You have a very broad connection and network. Where do you see the most interest in tokenized securities from investors, talking about both security token infrastructure projects and security token offerings themselves?
With security tokens, one of the major aspects is if you're registered. For example, if you go to Malta and you register your security in Malta, then you have investors from Malta investing, investors from that jurisdiction. I think right now, definitely a lot of potential from Asia, like Singapore. Singapore is one example. They're also looking to change their some of their regulations. They're already working on it. So definitely from Singapore and the US as well, just because they have they have the incubators, they have the resources. They have the regulations in place, and the US had this the Reg D form, and in the US applies not just for securities and tokens. It applies for companies in general when they want to raise capital. So I think in terms of I see from both sides, from the US and from Asia, a lot of interest, and that's why even you just have to look at the history where you had initially a lot of ICOs coming from successful ICOs, and you had the most successful ones came from the US and from Singapore. There was a map. If I can find it, I'll share it after the interview. But there was a map throughout the world, and even though the number of ICOs was higher in Switzerland, very few had success. But US ones and ones from Singapore had a lot of success in terms of fundraising and also developing an actual product. So what we're doing now, what we're seeing now is basically just an additional layer to the ICOs, which is the STOs, and they will follow the same path. They will follow either US or Singapore.
And do you think that this will change, and how this situation in China will affect other markets like Hong Kong, for instance?
So I know China, the government is investing a lot of money in AI and in blockchain infrastructure, just because blockchain can be used both for good, but also for spying on people and, the transparency where the government knows everything about you. I don't think we'll see a lot of changes in this perspective. The Chinese government is very solid in its decisions. So once they ban something, the likelihood of rethinking their decision is highly unlikely. Is influenced to some degree by the Chinese, by mainland China, just because it has always had a lot of pressure. We've always seen China wanting to claim Hong Kong, and a lot of pressures from Beijing politically and economically. I think, I don't think ICOs will return to China, but it's interesting because the Chinese are very much, they're huge gamblers. They love gambling. Have you ever been to Macau? If you go to Macau, and you'll see that the clubs are empty and the girls are by themselves, and the Chinese men are going to the casino and playing all night because they love gambling, and it's illegal in mainland China to gamble, but not in Hong Kong and not in Macau. So that's what they love to do, and that's why for them ICOs were appealing, because of their gambling nature. Because you could put some money in, and based on the market and demand, you could get 10x or 3x return. So that was, it was exciting for them. I there are some They're still doing events in China to raise capital. So you'll see these private events where they do like 7 days, 1 week tours where they target 2, 3 main cities like Shenzhen, Beijing, and another maybe Shanghai. And then they meet up with investors and they raise funds for projects, but they're not going to do it out openly. So but what you will see, and this is interesting, what you'll see events happening in Singapore, for example, where they fly in Chinese investors. All the booths and in the expo are in Chinese, all of them. There's nothing in English. I went to a few, nothing in English, everything in Chinese. So clearly it was targeted to the Chinese investor market. A lot of the money comes from China, a lot of the money in this industry.
Do you think that STO as a fundraising method has any potential to become more
financially reasonable than
than a traditional offering?
Think about what it means. It means you're creating a security token that doesn't really pull out the nature of a token, the speculation nature. It's gonna be more like stock markets, because basically what we'll see a lot of exchanges in the so we'll see a lot of platforms in the stock market industry listing security tokens, because I think they're the most equipped right now, and they're the ones that are actually ready for the market, just because of the nature of the stock market. And there's speculation there anyway. I mean, yeah, you work with prediction models, you predict movement, but it's still a gambling nature, because nothing guarantees that the shares of a company will go up to 100K. But the only difference is with tokens in general, and now with security tokens, the timeline will be shortened. With stock market, usually it's a long-term game, so you might see a return in like 10 years or maybe 5 years now, considering how some companies accelerate and the use of technology, the emerging technology. But with securities, you might see this in, I say, like 2 years or even less. So it accelerates, but it's not so different and this is my opinion. This is not financial advice, but I only see the acceleration being, different, like the timelines differing. I'm still concerned, and I'm half in either doing an STO, for example. I'm still very concerned because you're making very bold promises to investors. So one of there have been some models proposed in this industry, such as the a debt token, and then turned into a security token, basically swapped into a security token. I know, for example, there are jurisdictions where some companies will say that they're STO ready, like Malta, for example, they'll say they're STO ready and compliant and all that, but then you know that several banks have closed in Malta. That's a sign. And then you know that behind closed doors, some lawyers will tell you actually it's going to take end of 2019, beginning of 2020 until we can actually list the security token on an exchange, so we can offer liquidity to your investors. So that makes you wonder in this stage, if you really have a good product, either MVP or even a version 1 of your product, why not just do an equity raising in the traditional way? Because maybe it would make more sense to just go the traditional way, not necessarily, because it costs money. It's always, doing an ICO 2017 would cost you between 60 and 80K, $80,000, just the legal part. And I'm not saying how much money you had to put into marketing and product development, know that everything costs 3 times more just because it has blockchain to it. And now today with the STOs, it costs about 150K just on the legal side. So with 150K, you can develop, with 25K, you can develop a product. With 150K, you can develop a product and have the marketing for the first year.
One of the at least announced benefits of tokenization is the possibility of fractional ownership, which kind of means, democratization of the market. But we don't really see it a lot, but because the thresholds of minimum investments are still pretty high in most cases and in most regions. But do you see blockchain and asset tokenization becoming this democratizing force for the market?
I think it's too early to. You'll see that a lot of companies will either bootstrap or raise equity, and then at some point in the future consider doing an STO as opposed to an IPO. Just because the demands in an IPO are completely different, and they're stressing so much the product development, the future, the map of the product, and so on. So people might opt for STOs because they're more flexible. But at this point, I couldn't really say that they're gonna be the way to raise money in the future. I just think it's good that we have alternatives. I don't necessarily think that ICOs are done for. I think that if you have a community, like a strong community for your DApp, for example, like Brave has over 5 million registered users. That means that any time of the day, if they would want to raise a round of funding for maybe 3.0 development of their product, they could do that. They could offer packages and tell people you buy this package basically, this token that gives you access to 2 years premium membership while you hold it. So there are ways to do this. I just think ICOs, the way they were done until now, raising funds with zero community and building a community with the sole purpose of raising funds, that's not going to work anymore.
So blockchain has this potential to move it beyond national borders, beyond societies where they used to this kind of unified collaboration.
Yeah, there are industries in which blockchain makes a lot of sense. Whether it is, for example, real estate, and this is one example that we've seen tokenizing real estate. So several people could own fractions in the same building, just because especially in repopulated areas, the housing price is overwhelming, and it doesn't. There's interest, but there are not a lot of solutions for smaller scale investors. So then, instead of having a building listed for auction or for sale, but having to wait 2-3 years until someone buys it, just because you ask for $1 million or more, having multiple people buy in could be an option. This is something that I saw. This is an interesting model, but which I actually saw in Bucharest. you'll see a lot of people from Israel. So the the Jewish community is very strong, and what they do is they will unite and put money in, like 20K each, and then buy buildings around Bucharest, renovate them, and then rent them or sell them. Um, and the very interesting aspect of the Jewish community is even if they don't personally know each other, they have a business etiquette, which means they would never backstab each other. So applying this model to other, this is basically what I see, this older business model that the Jewish community had, really applying to in terms of tokenizing the real estate market, and it works. So I've seen it done in Bucharest for years and years, and it works. And it allows smaller scale investors to get access and be involved. What we're doing is we're going from an individualist approach to a collective approach. And you'll see this also in Japan, for example. In Japan, there's a sense of, there's a collective sense. So people, they are aware of the other person. And they know that what they're doing can influence the person next to them. And that's why their society is so unified, let's say, and it works. It has its issues, but it works. So if you take this, and that's why Bitcoin was kind of, because Bitcoin also implies peer to peer. I'm what I'm doing influences the other person, and the idea of collectivism, not from a socialist point. And that's why Bitcoin was adopted in Japan on a fast pace, and now it's a national currency. It gives, and that's one example where the idea of assets and blockchain and tokenization, it can work.
Thank you very much for your answers. This was very comprehensive. And we loved having you with us on Rally Tokenized. And thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. This is really interesting. And we hope to see you soon on some of the events.